Welcome to the fastest daf in town, Tanu Masechtas Kiddushin Daf Tes Zayin. We're going to begin on the fifth line from the top on Tes Zayin Amud Aleph. Ubishtar Minolan. How do we know when it comes to an Eved Ivri that not only are you able to acquire him with Kesef, but also with Shtar? So Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Im acheres yikach lo, that if you take another wife. So Akisha Kasav acheres, so the pasuk compares it to acheres. So Rashi says, Wakichas Kiddushin, to marrying someone with a mean of Kiddushin. Ma'acheres mekani b'shtar, apamavriya mekani b'shtar. Just like we learned in the previous Mishnah, that one of the ways you can acquire a woman is with a shtar, so too when it comes to Amavriya. Now, hanicham anir shtar ha'avriya adan kaisvai. That makes sense if you hold that when it comes to acquiring an Amavriya, it's the master that writes it, and by him writing it, he's able to acquire. So therefore, it's comparable to the situation of Kiddushin, says Rashi. Bitcha kanuyali, that your daughter is coined to me, but nasnal av, you give it to the father. Kaderach shar Kiddushin shabal kaisa bitcha hi mukadeshasli. So elamandi omer av kaisvai. But let's say it's the father that writes the shtar to the adain ma'akamemar. So in that situation, says Rashi, lo yof mashar Kiddushin umanole de kanule shtara. How do you can actually be kind with a star? So the Idmar star Amavriya Mikaisa, who writes it? Rav Huna Aimer, that Adon Kaisa, Rav Chista Aimer Av Kaisa, Nichel Rav Huna Rav Chista Malcolm Aimar. So it's Machlokus, who's the one who writes the star? Is it the father that again he's selling his daughter to this man, so to the Adon, so does the father write it to him, or is the other write it and give it to the father? So Rav Achbar Yaakov Makra. So therefore, we need to come up to a different pasuk. They does not go out like other slaves, says Rashi. When it comes to a non-Jewish slave, the din is, as we're going to discuss at great length shortly in the next Mishnah, that when it comes to owning an Eved Kanani, in which you actually are kind of the guf, there is an interesting distinction that he can go free if you knock out his eye or his tooth or one of his 24 limbs. Now it says Rashi, She'im simias einaha v'chein eino shel eved ivri ein yoitz behen el noitzlo demei eino v'zem mashlim sheish v'yaitze. So when it comes to an eved ivri, that's not the case. If you would knock out, let's say, his tooth, he doesn't go free. He still works for you, but you have to pay the Eved Ivri the value of how much the damage was. So when it comes to an Eved Kanani, we don't compare him to an Eved Ivri regarding Shein V'ayin. However, there are other ways that we do compare him. That just like an Eved Kanani, we can be kind with a star. And the reason why Rashi reminds us, as we'll see later on Daf Chaf Beis, is because we compare an Eved Kanani to karka, to land. And just like we know, we're also going to see in this Masechta, that you can acquire with shtar, kesef, and chazaka, one of the ways is with a shtar. So just like karka you can acquire with a shtar, so too an Eved Kanani you can acquire with a shtar. And therefore we're saying that only time we do not compare an Eved Kanani to an Eved Yisrael has to do with an Eved Yisrael is only in an Eved Ivri is only a situation where it's talking about Shein V'ayin, Rosh Havarim. However, in other ways, they are the same. And therefore, that's how we're going to learn out through this diak that an Eved Ivri you can be kind of with a star. Maybe, just like an Eved Kanani you can acquire the chazaka, that's what it's coming to tell you. That you can acquire an Eved Ivri with chazaka. Now, not shtar, which our Mishnah doesn't say. Our Mishnah says you can be kind of Eved Ivri with shtar, not with chazaka. But if we're comparing him to an Eved Kanani, so in L'chayr you should be able to make the statement that it's referring to chazaka. So Amar Kra, the pasuk says, "V'nisnachaltem oisam levnechem acharechem," that it'll be a nachal, an inheritance, and this is referring to an Eved Kanani. So we say it's like an achuza, just like when it comes to properties, you can be kind of those lands with chazaka. So therefore, an Eved Kanani, only is able to be kind of with karka, with chazaka. Oisam b'chazaka v'acher b'chazaka. Only in an Eved Kanani, because we're specifically mentioning that the connection and the purchasing and the inheritance of taking an Eved Kanani is like a stechuza, like a field of inheritance, and therefore we know a field, as we establish, you can do a chazaka on it, and that's how you own the property. So too, when it comes to an Eved Kanani only, which means not an Eved Ivri. Maybe it just means that only an Eved Kanani is with a star, but not anything else. We'll say Savanim means that only, again, by Shin V'ayin is an Eved Kanani, not like an Eved Ivri. However, when it comes to star, they're the same. So Myra Isa. So how do we know to say that it will come to, this diuk is coming to include one and to exclude the other? How do we know it's coming to exclude chazaka and include star? So Mustaber star have a little riboy. Because you can say, well, say it's Salvadim, maybe it's coming to include chazaka. No, star is probably what's come to include. Because we know that a star can be used in other manners, such as a woman who is married, so you can give her a star, you can give her a get, and that's how she goes free. So since we see that there are numerous other times in which you can use a star, so too over here must be the extra thing that we're coming to add based on the pasuk is talking about a situation of an Eved Ivri with a star. Adarabba. It's not true when it comes to Nixi Ger. If you have a convert in which he has no heirs, he has no relatives, and he dies, so how do you acquire his things? They're just sitting there. It's Hefker through Chazaka. So we see when it comes to Chazaka, certain things work. Our answer is that's true, but Be'ishus Miyas L'Ashachan. We've heard this answer numerous other times previously, that when it comes to matters of Ishus, we don't find. So therefore, even though true, Chazaka could apply in other circumstances, however, over here, we would rather use and understand the answer based on the fact that by shtar, it does work when it comes to a person, a woman, in regard to divorce. So too, when it comes to acquiring, should be the same thing. You can use a shtar. So that's answer number one. That's the reason why you have this pasuk of imacheres yikachlo, to be able to bridge this gap and to be able to say that you can acquire with a star. For Abhuna, Hailo says, so what does he do with this pasuk? That, as we said, that when it comes to an Eved Kanani, he only he goes free with Roshi Avarim, but not an Eved Ivri. So he says that you can actually learn out two things. First of all, that only an Eved Kanani goes free with Roshi Avarim, not an Eved Ivri. But also this other notion that when it comes to a star, you can be kind of an Eved Ivri, or an Amabri. But kindness atzimo b'shanim. And when it comes to him acquiring himself, if you have an Eved Ivri, one of the ways is with 6 years. Pasuk says it explicitly. He worked for 6 years. Or be yovel. He should work until yovel. So these are very clear. And third way that an Eved Ivri can be freed is b'geryon kesef, that if he pays the rest of his value. So as we said, he works for 6 years, and it's assessed how much that is worth, and therefore it's continuously deducted. Like he almost gets equity in himself, and therefore he's able to pay off the rest and go free earlier than the 6 years. So, Omer Chizkiah, on this Chizkiah says, because the pasuk tells us the hefta that you can be redeemed, which means that you can continue to deduct the amount of your worth, pay that off, and go free. Tana, v'kainis atzma b'kesef v'shava kesef ubishtar. He can be kind to himself, not only, as we said, with shanim, yom, and kesef, but also it can be kind with kesef, shava kesef, and a star. Now, bishlam kesef, kesef miknasai. I can understand kesef because the pasuk says kesef miknasai. Shava kesef nami yashigu lasam rachman rabba shava kesef. The fact that it says yashigu lasai, he'll return, so that we make a drasha that we compare shava kesef and kesef. What is this referring to? That here's a star for my worth. So hainu kesef. That's the same thing as money. El shichur. We're talking about all you did was write a star shechar, and that alone is enough to go free. Now star lumli. Why does he need a star? Lumli bapi trey zil. Why doesn't the guy just say in front of two people, you can go? Hinami bapi bedina zil in front of a basin. So Rabbi Zaysameris Evid Ivri Gufo Kanoi. According to this, there is an opinion that Evid Ivri is Gufo Kanoi. V'harav shemochal geroino ein geroino mochel. That because you have some ownership over him, you cannot just simply be moichel on this money. Says Rashi, Lafika harav shemochal al geroinoi inu mochel b'serach shichur. Until his time of freedom, if the master decides to forgive the rest of the money, it doesn't work, and he needs shichur. Says Rashi, v'im lav chayzim is sha'abid boy. He has to continue to work for him. Im yirtzed if he wants. Shaykh bo mechilos mamoin el loshen shichur. You have to actually free him. V'chi kasabli loshen shichur v'dasan le napik, then he does go free. Dol gorem mikanani, the napik b'shtar. When every Kanani goes free with a star, certainly every Ivri. Dechsiv o chupsha lo nitan lo v'gomer lo lo isha. Okay. Right. Yisera lo v'amavriya. So in addition to Shanim, Yoivil, Gurion Kesef, we also have an Amavriya that she goes free when she shows signs of maturity, Simonim. So I'm Reish Lakish. Now, before we see this, let's look at question 1. Ma'ala kavachaymer de boy Reish Lakish limoy mimen. What's the kavachaymer that he learned? The Amavriya kind of atzba misas av. That an Amavriya can also acquire herself with misas av when her father dies. So Amavriya, which is not one of the cases mentioned in the Mishnah. So Amavriya kind of atzba misas av and rishus adam kavachaymer. And this is going to be the answer. There's a kavachaymer that if she's now in the domain of the master, once her father dies, she no longer is an amavriya to this man. Why? Because when it comes to simanim, she shows signs of maturity. She's not going to automatically leave the rishus of the father, but nonetheless, the din is she does leave the rishus of the adain, which our Mishnah said that once she shows simanim, she's no longer in the rishus of the adain. So misa shemaitzim rishus av. We know that if, let's say, the father died, so then obviously she's not in the father's rishus. So in the din shemaitzim rishus adain. So then certainly, if the father dies, she should be able to leave the rishus of the adain. So it's a little bit interesting. Because madach by the simanim that it doesn't work by leaving the father's domain, but she can leave the master's domain by producing simanim. So when the av dies, when the father dies, she's leaving his rishus. So too, we should certainly say she'll leave the rishus of the adain here as well. So we're going to end up having a pirch on that, but that's the question. That's the kavachayre. Meisvei. He says there is one extra thing in which an amavriya has that the Eved Ivri doesn't. What is that? Dafka Simonim. Now, you should also mention the death of the father. Why does it mention that? Probably because it's not the case. Sounds like a good Kavachaimer, but the Mishnah would have mentioned Misa Sa'av as another way for her to be able to go to lead the Rishus of the Adain. So as the Gemara often answers, Tan of Ashir. That's not a Raya. Our Mishnah mentions cases, and it doesn't mention all the other cases. So it mentions Simonim. It decides not to mention Misa Sa'av. The question the Gemara always asks is, my Shir de Shir. It can't be that the Tan is only leaving out one thing, then he would have mentioned it. But if there's an extensive list, then that makes sense. He may have left things out. But what else could he have left out? So the Gemara says, Shir Misas Adain. The death of the Adain. She'll go free if not only if her father dies, but even if also when the master dies. So no, Imisha Misas Adain Lav Shiru. If the master dies, that's not adding anything. The Kivan de Ikanami Beish Velokatani de Ikanami Beish Velokatani. What does that mean? So it says Rashi, the isanami beish, the nirtsanami yotzim misas adain. We find that a nirtza also will leave the rishus of the master. Venu oivid esaben, and he's not going to work for the son, as we saw previously. So when it comes to a nirtza, so even a nirtza who is so locked in because he went through this ceremony to continue to work, the din is that once Misas Adon takes place, we already know that he goes free. So too over here, it's obvious. So we're not saying that Misas Adon, she would not go free, but it's so obvious that we doesn't even need to mention it. Well, in this Tana Davar Sheshul Kitzma Katani, Davar She'en Lo Kitzma Katani. Maybe the Mishnah only wants to mention things in which there is a set amount of time. Not something which does not have a set amount. Says Rashi, Sheshul Kitzma, V'kesabik Nasav, V'sheshanim V'yoivel Kuhu Yadil Emos V'kama. When it comes to the Shanim, you know you're leaving after 6 years. Yoivel, you know when Yoivel's coming, you're going to go free. But over here, we don't know when Misas Adain is going to take place, or Misas Av. So therefore, the fact is, we just don't mention that, because it's Ein Lo Kitzvah. Davar Shein Lo Kitzvah Katani. Abba HaSamanim Dein Lo Hem Kitzvah Katani. When it comes to Samanim, there's also no set amount, but it is mentioned as a way for it to go free. So Rav Safra Ein Lo Hem Kitzvah L'mala. No V'yesh Lo Hem Kitzvah L'mata, says Rashi. L'mala Amos D'Maisel Ach Yud Gimel Shanim Havi Samanim Nairos. That if she produces, and says Yud Gimel Shanim, I should say Yud Beis Shanim, that after 13 years, certainly that's considered to be a sign as we continue to test Zayin Rebeis, but not Lamata, says Rashi. Even if she does produce Simanim, but if it's at a very young age, that doesn't mean anything. So therefore, there is a kitzvah when it comes to Simanim, that there is a minimum age that it kicks in. So at the very least, just like Shanim and Yovel, we know when that's going to happen. So also there's a kitzvah when it comes to when her first opportunity will be to be able to bring and produce Simon Messiah. Ben, when it comes to a boy, Teisha Shanim, who's 9 years old, Shehevi Shtei Cyrus Shuma. At that point, because he's not yet hitting his 9th birthday, so we say even though if he does produce two mature hairs or pubic hairs, we just say it's a shuma. It's like a hair that grows out of a wart or such. However, miben teisha shana v'yom echad ad ben yud beis shana v'yom echad v'oidan boy shuma. What if he's 9? He's already had his 9th birthday until he's 12. So we say v'oidan boy, and it's still on him. So it also shuma. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Siman. No, it's actually a machlokas whether or not it's a siman or shuma between the ages of 9 and 12. Or ben yud gimel shana v'yom echad. Once the kid's 13, diriyakol siman. Then it's definitely a siman. So what do we see? So she could always produce it at 13, at 14, at 15. However, when it comes to producing simanim at a younger age, she can't do it. So we see that Simanim does have a kitzvah. So therefore, maybe again, the Mishnah only mentions case which has a kitzvah. However, things which don't have a kitzbah, like for example, Misa Sa'av, it doesn't mention. But maybe again, if the father dies, she will go free. Fine. Meis of Rav Sheshis. So now Rav Sheshis asks a question. Rav Shimon Omer, Dalid Manikin Lahem. There's 4 situations where a person who is a slave goes free, in which the master is going to have to give a gift. Gimel B'isha, Gimel B'isha. 3 are in the case of a man, and there's 3 cases by a woman. V'yati Yochel Omer Dalid Be'echad. We don't say 4 by one of them. Lefisha in Simanim Be'ish. So again, when it comes to a man, there's only 3. There's Kesef, there's Yovel, there's Shanim, and Gurin Kesef. So there's not the 4th one, because the 4th one, which is mentioned specifically about Mavriya, is Simanim. So a woman who shows signs of maturity, she goes free, but not an Eved Ivri, only in a Mavriya. However, V'ein Ritzia B'isha. Also, it's not exactly the same, because as we mentioned previously, the only person who can become a nirtza is a man. A woman cannot become a nirtza. V'im isa nisni nami misas av. Again, you could ask the kasha. If in fact you can go free by misas av, it should be mentioned. V'chitem hachanami tan v'shayir, it's leaving things out. Arba katani, it says a specific number, which is coming to exclude everything else. V'chitem atana davar shesh. It doesn't mention things which do not have a set amount. Similar question. We know that simanim do have a kitzvah, but yet it's still mentioned. So you could say the same thing that Rav Safra said, which is that ein lahem kitzvah amala v'yishem kitzvah amata. So you can always get out of that. So again, there's no real kasha. Now, v'ika misas adain de ein lahem kitzvah katani, but there's also misas adain, which does not have a kitzvah, and nonetheless it is mentioned. The death of the adain, misas adain nami lo katani. What do you mean? Misas adain is also not mentioned. Del arba ma'nihu. So if you tell me that there's 4 ways that he can go free, I understand. Shanim, yovel, gurin kesef, and then you mention a 4. Which is probably you're talking about Misas Adain. So no, Shanim v'yovel shel Ritzia v'alma havriya b'simanim. It's referring to yovel of the nirtza, that not only will you go free within the 6 years if it's yovel, but also a nirtza. Hachanam mistav tani seifa yati yochel arma abba be'echad mehem v'yishen mehem simanim b'isha v'ritzia b'isha. There's not 4 by either of them. Now v'im isa. If in fact what we're saying is true, then she would be able to go free by 4. She would go free by Shanim, Yovel, by Gurin Kesef, or Simanim, or what's also being added here is Misas Adain, Misas Av. So Masif Rav Amram, Ve'elu Manikin Lahen, in these, we're being specific, do you give gifts? It says beferish that b'misas adain, when the adon dies, that gifts are given to that servant. Here's a bigger question, because it doesn't leave out the case of misas adain. Clearly, you do go free by misas adain, but if you also go free by Misas Av, then the Mishnah should mention that. We should mention that here. So it says these are the ones, Elu. So this actually is a problem on the Kal V'Chomer that Reish Lakish began with, because we see clearly it mentions Misas Adain as one of the ways that you get gifts. So you can't say, oh, it only mentions cases in which there is a set amount, because death can happen at any time. So why does it mention Misas Adain, but it doesn't mention Misas Av? Even though Reish Lakish has this Kal V'Chomer, the reality is we don't hold like that. That an Alma Avriya is not going to go free just because her father died. Okay, but the problem is, you have a beautiful Kal V'Chomer, but Reish Lakish Kal V'Chomer Amar. So what do you do? Okay, fine. You gave me a tiyufta, but still, how do we understand this kavachaymer? Well, chayra, this kavachaymer should be good. Again, madich my simanim. If she shows simanim, so then she will not leave her father's house, but she leaves the reshus of the adon. So when it comes to death of her father, where she doesn't leave the reshus of the father, where she does leave the reshus of the father, then kol v'chaymer she should leave the reshus of the adon. So kol v'chaymer prichahi, v'sham digal mifrach malo simanim shenishtana haguf. Turn b'misas av shechein lo nishtana haguf. You can't compare this kal v'chaymer. So the reason why she goes free by simanim is because her body physically changed. So maybe that's the reason why she goes free. However, when it comes to misas av, so her body hasn't changed, and since there's no shinu haguf, so therefore maybe that's the reason why when it comes to misas av, she's not going to go free from the master. In fact, again, that's what we say. It's not a kal v'chaymer, and we have that pircha on the kal v'chaymer. Okay, question 1. So what's the kal v'chaymer and what's the pircha? This is question 1 as well as TA 13. Let's just read it. Kal v'chaymer ma simanim shein moitzin rishos av moitzin rishos adayin. So misa of the father shemoitzin rishos av inu din shemoitzin rishos adayin. The pircha ma was simanim shechein nishtana haguf. Okay, weiter. Tani chada, we learned in one place that enek eved ivri la'atzmai, the enek amhavri la'atzmai. That when it comes to them going free, so it says that they are able to keep this for themselves. V'tani idach enek amhavriya umatziyasa lavia. Actually, it says that when she gets these gifts or finds something, it goes to the father. She doesn't keep it. So how does it work by Amavriya? When we say that the Adain, upon freeing her, gives gifts, do those gifts go to the Amavriya or do they go to the father? Because then it says the master only gets the schar batala, which is the reward for not working. So my love, maybe this is actually going to prove like Reish Lakish. I know we had a tiyufta, but let's not go so fast to throw out Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish said you can go free by misas av. So the question is, how come sometimes it goes to the father and sometimes it goes to her? So maybe it depends if she has a father. If she was freed for some other reason, so then the father keeps it. However, if the father dies, and that's the reason why she goes free, so then obviously she gets to keep it. But what do we see? We see that that is the case in which we find that Misas Av will free her from the Adain, like Reish Lakish. Lo. In both situations, she showed signs of maturity. So the question is, why does sometimes she keep it and why does sometimes go to the father? Lo kasha. Hadi isil av. One is a situation where she has a father. Another situation is where she doesn't have a father. So let's say Lamoshul, she's a slave, she's an Amavriya, and she doesn't have a father. So obviously it's not going to go to the father because there's no father in the picture. So it goes to her. But it doesn't prove that she became free because the father died. Fine. Now, Bishlam Enek Amahavriel Atzma, I can understand why are we pointing this out, that when it comes to the Enek given to this Jewish this Amavriya, that she gets to keep it for herself. Why does it have to say that? Limuti Achen. It's coming to exclude brothers. What does that mean? It's coming to exclude brothers. Desanya. It says that maybe when it comes to an Eved Kanani, there is a din or steachuza that it goes to the children, to the brothers, to the sons, but not that the daughters will be given over to the sons. We see from here that a person cannot be morish the schus of his daughter to his sons. So therefore, we see clearly that's the chiddush, that the enek of an Amavriya is for herself, and therefore you shouldn't think that the enek, if she doesn't have a father, it should go to her brothers. No, she keeps it herself. El enek Eved Ivri L'atzma Pshita El Oman. If we're talking about an Eved Ivri, so in this situation, who else would get it if not for him? So Omer Rav Yosef, Yud Keres Kachazin Hacha. The letter Yud, which is small, I see it as a large city. Says Rashi, Yud Shi Katana Asa Ir Gedoyla. You're making like a mountain out of a molehill. Kalemer Herech Mishnaso Chinam. You're making this big thing really for no benefit. Why? Kachazina Hacha. Abai Omer Hachi Omer Rav Sheshes Hamani. Who is this? Tuta'ihu. Desani Tuta'i Omer. The Tuta'i said, Lo v'lo bal chayvai, that it goes to him and not to his creditors. Says Rashi, B'sfirulon Rabbi, B'sfirulon Reb Nasan asalo after convertial ale. So as we said before, the Shibud Rav Nasan or the B'maimed Shlashton, what happens is that if A owes B and B owes C, so A can pay directly to C. So therefore the question is, when it comes to these gifts, does it go to the Eved? Or what if the Eved also owes money to someone else? So in this case, the master doesn't have an obligation, does not give the gifts directly to his creditors, but rather the din is that it goes to the Eved himself. Okay, question 2. Tanya, Enek Eved Ivri La'atzmo, Ve'enek Amavri La'atzmo. La'atzmo L'mutimai, La'atzmo L'mutimai. So La'atzmo is coming to exclude Bal Chayvoi. Even though we normally have the Shibud Rav Nasan, we say it doesn't work in this case. And when it comes to La'atzma, is coming to exclude her brothers. That it doesn't go to the brothers, they're not Yarish. Kufa. Elu Manikin Lahem. These are the cases in which the Adon has to give gifts. These are the 4 cases. Ubisamanim actually throws out another case, that if after 6 years or it's Yovel, the master dies, and when it comes to an Amavriya, Simanim. So I was mentioning up until now, by Gerin Kesef, you pay off that you should receive. That's not the case here. It says clearly that someone who is, first of all, a Boreach, someone who runs away and is freed subsequently, that he is not going to be able to get any gifts. Similarly, Gerin Kesef. If your money, you deducted your money, that's how you became free, you also don't receive. Rameir Omer, no. Boreach ein manikin loy. It's actually machlokas, that when it comes to someone, an Eved who just runs away, and a Chinami, I agree, he's not going to receive anything. However, when it comes to someone who paid his way off, so manikin lo, you have to give him a gift. There's Shimon Omer Arba manikin lohan. There's 4 cases. Shloish b'ish, v'gimel b'isha. Naviyata yochel loimer Arba. You can't say a 4th one, be'ech mehem lafi shein simon b'ish. So the one which is unique to a woman is simanim. Ritzia b'isha, and a woman cannot become a nirtza. So therefore, it's only referring to a man. So, but when a nirtza goes free, let's say by Yovel, so he also gets gifts. So mina hanimili. So how do we know this is the case? The Tanabana. Yachol lo yehi manikan el lo yitzel b'sheish. I would think he should only be able to receive it after the 6 years. But not in the rabbis yitzel b'yovel v'misas ha'adayin. But how do we know these other ways you also are going to be able to receive these gifts? Talmud Leimer tishalchenu. It says you shall send send them. When you send them, maybe when it says you're sending him with these gifts, you should also do it in a situation of Gerin Kesef, or the case of him running away. Talmud Leimer tishalchenu chashimin mi'imoch. When he's free from you. Mi sheshiluchai mi'imoch. Yoitze berech v'yoitze b'gerin kesef she'ein shiluchu mi'imoch. In this situation, he's not being really sent from you, says Rashi. She'ehei makabel giroyin u'mishalcho. You're giving him the money, and you're leaving, says Rashi. Medaitcha ela me'aleihem. So it's not something which just happens because the years take place. It's shanim, it's simanim, it's yovel. But in these other cases, a barech, you're the one that caused it to happen, or you're the one that paid the money. So in that situation, it doesn't apply. Why? The ein shiluchim imach. It's like you're sending him away nonetheless. Now, Boreach Hashlama boy. This is hard to understand. That the guy who ran away, he needs to pay, says Rashi. L'hashim sheish l'yachar hashlama hari hu ki yotze b'shanim v'yanikehu. So if he ran away, he's not allowed to run away. He still has to work, let's say, a couple more years. So he has to go back and finish up his job. After he finishes his job, then after the 6 years, again, he should be able to get the stuff. He should be able to get the anaka. Just because you run away, you still have to come back and finish up. You have to work for 6 years. I don't care that you ran away. Come back and finish it up. As we continue, Tzad Manal. You would think even if he's sick, says Rashi, let's say, guy never ran away, but unfortunately he was sick for a certain amount of time. So does he have to make up those days, those months? No. The fact is, he was there for 6 years. He got sick sometime. The reality is he doesn't have to make it up, because Talmud Lemer, that he goes free on the 7th year. So the question is, well, what are you talking about? If he's a bayreach, then l'chayra he should have to make up those years, and then he'll get the gifts afterwards. So Rav Sheshes he ran away, and before he was able to get caught or go back, Yovel came, which he would have been freed anyway. So Ma'odatema hoyel v'apikle Yovel shilucha mi'imakrin be v'loi niknesei v'nanikle kamashmulan. You would think that since Yovel came, and he didn't run away, let's say he just ran away yesterday, right? And then tomorrow's Yovel. So if he decided not to run away and he just stayed, he would have been freed anyway at Yovel, and he would be able to receive his gifts. So therefore we should say, the fact that he ran away, and now it's Yovel, we shouldn't kanas him, let him get his gifts. No. The din is we don't. You would think even if he was sick, that he has to make up those days. So if he'll kol sheish, let's say he was sick all 6 years, Nebuch, you get an Eved Ivri, he doesn't work because he's sick all 6 years. He was sick for 3 and he worked for 3, so if at least he worked for 3 years, he doesn't have to finish it. However, kol sheish, however, he was sick for all 6 years, he does have to pay. So Omer Rav Sheshes boisamasim mechat. What does that mean? He's a taifer. So it doesn't mean that he didn't do any work. Even though he was sick, he did something. So as long as he was doing something, that would be enough that he wouldn't have to make it up. So Haguf Kash, this is actually a stira in itself. If you work 3, at least he worked 3 years, he doesn't have to complete it, which is Mashma Ha'arba. Let's say he didn't work for 4 years, Chayvel Hashlam, he has to make that up. If let's say he was sick all 6 years, only then does he have to make it up. Hadalad in Chayvel Hashlam. So what is it? So I understand 3 you don't have to make up, 6 you do, but how about everything in between? So Halchakamer. Chol Adalid, this Gemara, we often hear this in many places. If you're sick for 4 years, if you have been sick for 4 years, which is the majority of your term, that's ki'u, like you were sick the entire time, and therefore because of that you will have to make it up. TB 14. I'm going to stop here. Let's look at TB 14. The question is, Eved shechola him chayv hashlim sheish. He was sick. Does he have to make it up? So I wrote im chayla pachas mishol shanim ein sarach lahashlim. Should say shol shanim. You don't have to make it up. Avol yaisim izeh hu sarach lahashlim sheish. If it's more than that, then you will have to make it up. I only gave myself half credit because what was also being asked is like this. Again, if you're sick for 3 years, you don't have to make it up. If you're more than if it was 3 years of the 6, you don't have to make it up. If it was more than the 3 years, you do have to make it up. That I wrote. However, then he adds this: V'im yochel asos b'chalya b'afil malacha katana. If during your sickness you could at least have done something, doing something, afil chol kol sheish in chayv l'hashim. Even if you're sick all 6 years, but at least you're doing something productive during that time, then you do not have to make it up. Ad kan.